Welcome back to my 21 days challenge. In our last video, we have discussed about the overview of the word communication and 5 means of communication. So what are those 5 means of communication? So we've talked about verbal, non-verbal, written, listening, and visual. So these are the 5 means of communication. Let's look at the first means of communication right now. So what is the first means of communication? It's verbal, right? We've talked about verbal. So let me tell you, if someone asks you what is a verbal communication, we know that. We all know that. We can easily say that it is a type of oral communication where the message is transmitted through the spoken words. Right? So it's easy, we all know that. Basically, what happens is when we want to convey a message, we are considered to be the sender. And the person who is to be conveyed is called the receiver, right? So here the sender gives the words to his feelings, thoughts, and ideas and opinions and express them in a form of speech, discussions, presentations like I'm doing right now. So this is how we communicate, right? But let me ask you this. We know that this is how we communicate and we know the meaning of communication. But let me ask you, how many of us can do this effectively? That is the question, right? When I say effectively, what I'm trying to ask you is, how many of us are capable of conveying your message correctly and can convince your ideas to the person who you're speaking to? Do you think it's easy? Well, if we all can do this easily, then I think we will have limited problems in our world. Because most problems are occurring due to the lack of communication or improper communication. I hope you all agree with me on that. Let me tell you about an incident that happened in an airport a long time ago due to an improper communication. So there was this flight that was about to take off, and one of the crew members called the flight deck and asked the pilot to turn around. So the pilot thought that the flight is at risk and turned the flight around and returned it to the departure. However, the flight attendant or the crew member, she had only wanted him to turn around and see that the cabin door had opened and needed closing. You see the importance of proper communication? She could have simply asked him to turn around and see the door and tell him that it needs closing, right? It was very easy. She should have been clearly mentioned that, specified about it. Fortunately, nothing happened, but this is why it is important that we need to be specific when communicating. But how do we communicate effectively? We say that we need to communicate effectively, we need to communicate clearly, but how do we do that? Let it be in your house, in office, marketplace, wherever the case may be, communication is the key, as I said. But what I would say is communicating effectively is the key. Would you like to know how we can communicate effectively? Well, that's exactly the reason why I decided to do these videos. But before we learn how to communicate effectively, we need to understand ways of communication, because it is not something that we can achieve within a day or two. It needs practice, it needs understanding. Let us understand something very easy to remember. So, I would request every one of you to take a pen and a paper and write this down, because it is very important and it's easy for you to remember in future. So what I'm trying to do is here, the word communication, what does it start with? What letter does it start with? It starts with C, right? So let us look at the 6 C's of communication. So let's look at the six C's of communication. What are the 6 C's of communication? Write it down, please. Okay? So number 1, clear. Okay? Number 2, correct. Number 3, complete. Number 4, concise. Number 5, consideration. Number 6, courteous. I don't want to widely explain about these 6 C's as the word itself is telling you its purpose, right? But we will go through it briefly just for you to understand what those 6 C's means, right? So the first one, as we said, it's clear, right? So communicating clearly, right? It's something very important because it should be easily understandable. That's the whole idea of it. So if you want to communicate it clearly, you need to be clear about the message that you want to convey. So it needs to be clear. That's what it means. So number 2, as we said, it's correct, right? Though you are clear about your message, but can't convey it correctly, what's the point? There's no point, right? It needs to be correct message that you can deliver, or else it will become a miscommunication. Now the third one is complete. If your message is not complete, you will end up creating problems, like I mentioned before about the flight case, right? So we need to ensure that the message is complete, right? Like the crew was not clear about it. I mean, she did not completely convey the message, so he took it wrong, right? That's exactly what it means. Now, concise. The message should be precise, to the point. To the point. Know that, right? Do not make it complicated, explaining it too much. Now, the next one is consideration. Here comes the importance of the receiver. We need to consider the receiver's feedback or opinion. In order to communicate, the sender must relate to the target recipient and need to be involved. So that's a 5th C. Now the last but not the least, courteous. This is my favorite. And there's a reason why it's my favorite. You will know it eventually. Being courteous is very important in communication. This is where, when we communicate, taking the receiver's feelings into consideration. So receiver's feelings into consideration, right? We will talk more about it in the upcoming videos. So I'm signing off for now. Stay tuned for more interesting videos in the upcoming days. Goodbye.